Good morning. When I think about my brother, the Reverend Bert Zug, the following quote from Dr. King comes to mind. All I am saying is simply this, that all life is interrelated, that somehow we're caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. For some strange reason, I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. You can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. This is the interrelated structure of reality. Close quote. My life is interrelated with Reverend Zug's life through faith. Over the last 6.5 years, I've been blessed by my brother's messages in chapel, by how he greets people, by his positive attitude, his humble nature, and the incredibly bright light that lets me know that God's goodness and love resides in him. My brother is a scholar of a man with characteristics similar to the ones that I just mentioned, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. King believed in many things, but I want to quote 3 things that he said that I think are key. Number 1 is that the time is always right to do the right thing. Number 2, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And 3, love is the only force capable of transforming an enemy into a friend. In a few moments, Reverend Zug will share with you his reflections on the life and legacy of Dr. King. I ask that you open your ears and hearts this morning to receive the blessing of Reverend Zug's message. It is my honor and privilege to ask all of you to please stand and greet our middle school chaplain, my friend and my brother, Reverend Bert Zug.
The words of my mouth, the meditation of all our hearts, be now and always acceptable to you, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. Please be seated. All right, for the sake of the video, I'm trying to figure out whether my microphone works. You guys picking it up through the speakers or just? Now it is. Okay. I'm very thankful for the opportunity to speak today. I'm very thankful for the invitation of Reverend Squire and the vestry. But I got to admit, when Colin Wright emailed me saying that I was going to speak on the birthday and celebration of the birthday of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., I was flabbergasted. I mean, most of you actually have had me for 8th grade religion. And you know I love King. You know I've studied him. I know his sermons. I know his speeches. I know his autobiography. I love the man. I mean, he is a great American. But who am I? Who am I to speak on Dr. King? In my desperation, I emailed Courtney Portlock right after I got Colin's email and go, Courtney, I'm white. I'm well-to-do. I'm male. I'm heterosexual. I'm well-educated. I have never known persecution of any type in my life. Is this really a good idea? Courtney, in her wonderful way, in our conversations of the last couple of weeks, have basically said, yes. And the reason why is because you know that you are a person of privilege. And the very fact that I know that I'm a person of privilege gives me something to say this morning. So I want to honor a man this morning who died that our country might become just. I want to honor a man who went through horrors that I have never and never will experience. Because I am a person of privilege. I will never know what it means to be on a bus and ask to give up my seat because the other person on the bus is white. I will never know what it means to drive through Bryn Mawr and be pulled over by a police officer simply because of the color of my skin. I will never know what it means to work and work and work and work and finally get into the college of my choice and be told the only reason why I got into that college is because I'm black. I will never know what it means to grow up in Philadelphia and know the only way out the poverty that I am experiencing is through a good education, and know that there is no way I can get a good education in North Philadelphia. I know what it means to work hard for decades in an office and know that I will never be promoted because I am a woman and the glass ceiling is there and there is no way they will promote me. I will never know what it means to be in love and want to ask someone to a prom and know that person loves me, but know that if we ever went to that prom together, we would be ridiculed for every day that we spend at Episcopal from that day on, because that person is the same gender as I am. I don't know what it means to be a Muslim going through airport security. I don't know what it means to be a Muslim who watches a Florida minister in the name of Christ burn my scriptures and claim that America wants that to happen. I don't know what it means to be a Latino in Arizona at this point. I do not know the type of suffering and persecution that many of the people of our country feel and experience day to day, not 60 years ago, but today. I am a person of privilege. I grew up in Haverford, Pennsylvania. When I was born, my older brothers were attending an all-male, all-white, independent day school by the name of the Episcopal Academy. I entered Episcopal in 1965. I know from Charles' history of Episcopal that the first student of color to be admitted to Episcopal happened in 1964. I have no idea who that was because clearly whoever it was didn't graduate. And I feel for whoever that was. Because to be the first person of color at Episcopal must have been very, very difficult. In the late 60s, a person entered the school by the name of Darrell Francis. Darrell was the first African American to graduate from Episcopal Academy. And by the grace of God, he and my brother became good friends. Because I had never experienced a white person and a black person meeting each other on equal ground. Every black person I had known in my life was my servant. The closest one I was to was Ida Williams, who was our maid, a wonderful woman. It did do wonderful things because it taught me, frankly, not to fear people of other races. Because Ida was a wonderful woman. And she cared, and she was strict, and she was fair, and I got a very good impression of people of color, except that I learned that people of color were my servant. Darrell was not my servant. George Greenwood, the track up here, is named after Mr. Greenwood, Tom Greenwood's father, recruited Darrell to run track. And Darrell saved his life because he used to be on relay team in the inner city, and every other member of his relay team died very early in life. It's very difficult to grow up in the inner city, particularly if you're male. The life expectancy is not all that great. Darrell claims that Mr. Green, bringing him to Episcopal, literally saved his life. Graham and my brother Graham and Darrell hit off real well, and it was wonderful to see. And I remember them going to the Penn relays, and at that time, it was okay to have a white relay team. It was okay to have a black relay team, but to have an interracial relay team, that was kind of shaky. And I remember Graham and Darrell planning together that if attacked by either race, they were going to stand back to back and defend each other, with Graham facing the whites and Darrell facing the blacks. They loved each other. They cared for each other. In 1969, my first person of color, who was my classmate at Episcopal, entered the school. His name was George Fisher. And I got to tell you my ignorance. I am a little embarrassed about this. I didn't know he was black. I just thought he was white with interesting hair. I mean, he was really light colored, and I hope George will forgive me. He went through all of Episcopal. He was my classmate the whole time. We were never close, but we respected each other. But then in the fall of 70, John Joseph entered Episcopal. Teaching here at this point will remember John Joseph. John and I hit it off immediately. I think partially because of my brother's relationship with Darrell, I warmed up to John immediately, and not all of my classmates did. And we hung out together, and I remember bringing John home for a play date for my first time. And we pulled in our old Ford station wagon, and John goes and looks at my house and goes, "That is a huge house." And I go, "No, it's not. It's my home." And he goes, "That's a huge house." And I go, no, you don't get it. You're seeing it from the wide side. It's only 2 rooms deep. It's not really that big. Look, well, let's go inside. I'll show you. We get into the foyer of our house. It's running staircase, and it's a broad hall. And he goes, "Bert, this is a huge house." I didn't think it was a huge house. Guys, I grew up in an 11-bedroom house. You want to know what a person of privilege is? A person of privilege is a person who grows up in an 11-bedroom house and does not believe that he lives in a big house. It was normal, right? I had 5 brothers and sisters, and my parents and me, and we only had 7 bedrooms on the second floor. It's one for each of us. I'm sure that if my parents had 10 kids, I would have thought we had a 10-bedroom house, at least on the second floor. The trouble with being a person of privilege is we don't know we're a person of privilege because it's the way we live. We're so into it, we don't realize the advantages we have, and we get offended by people who do not have the privileges that we have because they're unhappy, as if it's somehow their fault that they didn't grow up in an 11-bedroom house. It's amazing how blind we can be. In college, I went to Trinity College in Hartford, and I was working in a soup kitchen. And I was kind of proud of myself for working in the soup kitchen. I thought I was actually dealing with real problems and real people rather than the academia that we normally deal with in the classroom. And I was talking at a fraternity party about this, and my classmate goes to me, "That's great, but I think you're doing the wrong thing. You're enabling these people by feeding them. They have to pick themselves up by their own bootstraps. Look, if they weren't so lazy, they ended up in the street, well then, doing by feeding them is just enabling dysfunction." And I was thinking, that day, I had an extended conversation in this soup kitchen with a Vietnam vet. He was an Air Force pilot. And there's a funny thing in Vietnam. Air Force pilots were allowed to go home after their 100th mission. It sounds on the surface like something to look forward to. You know when your service is going to end. The difficulty is once you get to your 70th mission, once you get to your 80th mission, once you get to your 90th mission, and the chance to go home is so close, it starts affecting you psychologically. You start making mistakes as you fly an airplane. You're so nervous about getting home that it destroys your mind. And he got through his 100th mission, and he came home to find a country that hated him because he fought for our country in an unpopular war. He was not able to get a job. He was not able to recover psychologically. He was not able to be supported by the community, and he ended up on the street. And this state of mind, who had never known hunger, never known need, never known rejection on a scale that this man had the gall to say he deserves to be on the street. How blind can we be? A couple years later, I was ordained and I was working for St. Albans Church, which is just up the street. And I was the youth minister, and we went to Mexico and did we were doing a missions trip, and it was great stuff. We actually stayed in Texas and went across the border each day to build houses. And St. Albans was there with a church from Kentucky, and I got out of the shower once and went it's right before bed, and went into the bunks, and the kids from both St. Albans and the church in Kentucky started laughing at me. I dried off my hair and it was sticking up straight, and my hair was longer then than it is now, and I looked kind of goofy, and I got amused by it too, and I said, you know, it's my Don King imitation. And Don King, you may remember, was the boxing promoter many years ago. And his hair always stuck absolutely straight up. It was his style. It was his identity. And the clergy person, his name was Ron from Kentucky, you don't want to associate yourself with Don King. And I go, why not? And he goes, he's a crook. Now, don't get me wrong. The boxing profession is not always the most honest in the world. And I thought he might not know something that I don't. So I said, so why do you think Don King was a crook? And he said, he has to be a crook. He's a black man with money. And I was floored. I don't even know what I said. It's like, this man is leading, he's a pastor of a Christian church. He's leading the kids in his youth group to do mission work to the underprivileged of northern Mexico. And he is totally clueless about race. How blind can we be? Now, the worst thing is, I know I have blind spots. I know that my theology is wrong in places. I just know where it is. I can't see where I'm blind, by definition. There are things that I've supported historically that I'm really embarrassed that I really used to be against women's ordination. Sorry. Looking back, I was really trying to work with the scriptures, really trying to figure it out, and what I thought was a lot of conclusions. I'm embarrassed. And I apologize, because some of you I know struggling with the scriptures have come to that conclusion and are there at the moment. And I hope we can still have dialogue on issues of women's ordination, of homosexuality, of the decisions where our community is divided. Lord knows if we can't have dialogue, we're in a pretty bad place. If we can't have dialogue, we can't grow. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. grew up in an age of deep prejudice. He initially grew to hate the white man. And he identifies his first true hate of the white man when he was asked to give up a seat on a bus, had to stand for 6 hours as he traveled from city to city, and all he could do was stew at the injustice of it, and he was convinced that white people were evil. by God's grace, truly by God's grace, he grew from that position to realize that all people are made by God, and all people are made in the image of God, and that he had no desire to defeat or humiliate the white man. He wanted to be an equal. He wanted to stand as brothers, black, white, of all races. And so he made a difference in life. And he marched for what he believed in. He received up to 40 death threats a day, and he marched on. His house was bombed more than once. His family was threatened, and he marched on. He marched in Selma and Montgomery. He marched in Birmingham, in Chicago, and Tennessee. And finally, after years of work in Tennessee, he came to the defense of people, as he always did, who were getting abused by the greater system. And he concluded with these words, his speech in Memphis, Tennessee on April 3rd, 1968. Now, it doesn't matter now. It really doesn't matter what happens now. I left Atlanta this morning, and as we got started on the plane, there were 6 of us, the pilot said over the public address system, "We're sorry for the delay, but we had Dr. Martin Luther King on the plane, and to be sure that all the bags were checked, and to be sure that nothing would go wrong on the plane, we had to check out everything carefully. We've had the plane protected and guarded all night." And then I got into Memphis, and some began to say the threats or talk about the threats that were out, or what would happen to me from some of our sick white brothers. No. What will happen now? We've got some difficult... My mic is going in and out, so I'm going to go over here. These words are too important to skip. But it really doesn't matter now, because I've been to the mountaintop. And I don't mind. Like anyone, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And he's allowed me to go up to the mountain, and I've looked out, and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. And so I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. My eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. And next morning, he was shot, and he could no longer march. I love the Lord Jesus because he died for me. And I love Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., because he followed in my Lord's footsteps and died for this country. He did not die only for the people of color. He died that our society might become just, that we as a people might live into our own creed, that all people are created equal, that we are endowed by our Creator by certain unalienable rights, that they are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. He died so that we might become who we claim to be. Jesus said, "Greater love has no one than this, than that person give up his life, his or her life, for a friend." Dr. King gave his life for the people of the United States. Yes, for his people first, to see that his people might be free, but really for all people. Guys, look at you. I mean, look at the people around you. You're beautiful people. I mean, you really are. You are some of the smartest people our society has to offer. You're athletic. Almost all of you are healthy. Almost everyone in here will have the opportunity to live a very comfortable life. You are getting a great education, and that's true No matter what gender, race, orientation you are being given the opportunity to live large. It is extraordinary how important an education is, and you are being given that. Every person in this room, some more than others, but every person in this room is a person of privilege. Some of you know the value of this. Some of you will travel 2 hours to get to school because where you live, you can't get a good education, and you're going to come to a place that will allow you to succeed in life. You will have the opportunity to succeed. The question is, in the comforts of life, will your life have purpose? Will it have meaning? Will the world be better when you leave because you lived here? If Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. did not die in vain, it's because people choose to follow in his footsteps, that they choose to examine their own principles and try to figure out where they are falling short of the American dream, not as their own privilege, but to look at society and go, you know what, that's not freedom, that's not fair, that's not a society that really believes that every person is entitled to the pursuit of happiness, that is entitled to freedom. If we and you, as really, and I'm not trying to flatter you, I really believe it, you're the brightest and best of our society. You're not alone, but you're really good. And you may not see that because you're getting a B in a class and everybody else is getting an A. Guys, it's hard to get a B at Episcopal. You are among the brightest of the best. Please, make a difference in life. Don't assume that the way you live your life is the way everyone lives their lives. Look at the world and see what difference you can be. And then Dr. King will not have died in vain. For the work that he began in the 50s and the 60s will be continued today until justice does flow down like water and righteousness as an ever-flowing stream.
Let us kneel to pray.